Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We're all about getting you informed efficiently, no information overload here. We cut through the noise to bring you the essential insights that really matter.
And today we are diving into something super fascinating. We're going to unlock these hidden thinking tricks that can really sharpen our decision making.
Yeah, you know those sneaky mental patterns that influence our choices? We've been poring over some really compelling research to extract the practical knowledge that can actually give you an edge.
Absolutely. Think of this as a fast track to understanding those core principles about how we think and how we make choices.
We're going to journey through 7 key areas, and these are going to fundamentally shift how you approach those decisions.
Yeah. And it all starts with the power of two. That is, tapping into system one and system two thinking.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. System 1, that's like the fast lane of our brain, right?
Yeah, think of it like autopilot, those intuitive, emotional, automatic responses.
Those gut reactions, those split-second judgments. Yeah.
Exactly. Little to no effort. And then you've got system two. That's where we slow down, get more deliberate, and engage that logical side.
So more like when you're tackling a complex problem or carefully weighing your options.
Precisely. It requires focus, demands mental effort.
Okay, so understanding this whole dual system thing, how does that benefit us in the real world?
Well, let's say you are problem solving. Let's say you get this flash of intuition about a tricky situation. Recognizing that as your system one chiming in can prompt you to engage system two.
Ah, so you don't jump to conclusions based on just your gut.
Exactly. You want to really dig into the details, avoid those snap judgments on more complex issues.
Yeah.
And it even impacts how we communicate.
Yeah, like how so?
Well, think about it. If you want to make a quick emotional connection with someone, you tap into their system one.
Right, using emotions and simplicity.
But if you need to persuade someone with facts and figures, you got to engage their system two.
Interesting. So you really have to tailor your communication based on who you're talking to and what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
But what about the flip side? What if we're not aware of these two systems? What are some of the pitfalls?
Oh, man, you're setting yourself up for some major mistakes. If you rely solely on your gut feelings, your system one, for those crucial decisions.
The ones that need more deliberate thinking.
Right. And you might find yourself trying to persuade someone and falling flat because you're not talking to the right system.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
And if you're constantly operating in that high effort system too, without giving your brain a break, you're going to hit cognitive overload.
Which can lead to burnout and decreased productivity.
Precisely.
All right, so how are some companies here in the US using this two-system thinking to their advantage?
Well, just look at branding. McDonald's with those golden arches, those catchy jingles, they're tapping straight into system one, instant recognition and positive association.
That's a great example. So it's not just about logic and data, it's about understanding the emotional side of decision-making as well.
Right. Now, on the flip side, let's say you've got Dyson. They are really diving deep with the engineering aspects of their products.
Appealing to the analytical system, too.
Exactly. And when it comes to long-term strategic decisions, think about a company like Google.
They're all about data, right?
Yeah, they're making decisions based on tons of data analysis and forecasting. That's system two driving those choices.
So they're not just relying on instinct, they're backing it up with evidence.
Exactly.
Now, what happens when companies ignore these two thinking systems? What are some common mistakes that we see?
Sometimes you get products that look really cool on paper, but in practice, they're a nightmare to use.
They haven't thought about the user experience.
Exactly. They fail to meet those system two needs. Thinking about usability.
That makes sense.
And then you might see some marketing campaigns. They might be for complicated software, but they are filled with all this technical jargon.
And they just lose people right away.
Yeah, they fail to engage system one. No initial spark of interest.
Right. They need to simplify the message, create that emotional connection before diving into the complexities.
Totally. And then you see businesses making these rash decisions based on a fleeting trend.
Because it feels right.
Yeah, pure system one, but there's no logical justification, no system two backing it up.
So for our listeners out there, how can they use this understanding of the two thinking systems to their advantage?
I think it comes down to recognizing when to use each system. Quick, everyday decisions, maybe system one is enough. But when you're facing a tough strategic challenge or a high-stakes decision, shift gears.
Engage that system too.
Slow down, gather all the info, and analyze it. And don't forget, when you're trying to communicate, think about your audience.
Right. Are you trying to connect with them on an emotional level or persuade them with logic?
You got it. Tailor your message. Let's say you're launching a new project. You might start with a captivating vision statement that resonates emotionally, that's system 1. Then you follow up with a detailed plan and data, that's system 2.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now let's move on to our second key insight. Beware the shortcuts. That is, understanding and overcoming those pesky cognitive biases.
So our brains are all about efficiency, right? And system 1 loves those mental shortcuts. They're super useful, but sometimes they lead to predictable errors in our thinking.
Those are the cognitive biases.
Exactly.
Can you give us a few examples of those mental detours?
Sure. One is the halo effect. You meet someone, they impress you in one area, and suddenly you view them positively in other areas, even if they aren't related.
Oh yeah, I can see that happening. What else?
You've got the availability heuristic. You tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that easily come to mind,
Yeah.
usually because they were recent or emotionally charged.
Like, if you just saw a news story about a plane crash, you might be more afraid of flying, even if statistically it's still very safe.
Yeah, and then there's anchoring. That's when the first piece of information you get about something, even if it's random, sticks with you and it influences your judgments later on.
So being aware of these biases, what's in it for me? What's the upside?
Knowing these biases can sharpen your judgment in yourself and others. For example, let's say you're in a negotiation. Understanding anchoring can help you set a better initial offer. You resist being swayed by the other person's starting point.
Makes sense. You are less likely to be manipulated.
Exactly. And let's say you're working on a marketing strategy. Being aware of the availability bias can stop you from chasing the latest trend that might be fleeting.
So you stay focused on your long-term strategy.
Right.
What are some consequences if we don't understand these biases? What can go wrong?
You might find yourself making bad hiring decisions. You're charmed by someone in an interview, halo effect in action, but they actually lack the skills you need.
You're so focused on their personality that you overlook their qualifications.
Or you might misjudge risks. Let's say there was a recent incident that made headlines. You overreact because of the availability heuristic.
And you end up neglecting other risks that are less obvious but could be more important.
Exactly. And in those negotiations, you might end up accepting a bad deal simply because you got anchored to the other party's initial offer.
Interesting. So how are some companies here in the U.S. actively trying to reduce the impact of these cognitive biases?
Well, a lot of companies, like Google, have structured interviews. They use predefined questions and scoring systems.
So they try to make it more objective.
Right. Helps to minimize that halo effect. Then you've got insurance providers, like State Farm. They heavily rely on all that statistical data.
They're not just going with their gut feeling.
No, they're using long-term trends and probabilities to assess risk. That helps combat that availability bias. And tons of corporations invest in negotiation training.
So their employees can spot these biases and use strategies to counter them.
You got it.
What about companies that aren't paying attention to these biases? What kinds of missteps do they make?
Well, sometimes they hire someone based solely on a great interview. That halo effect strikes again.
But later they discover the person isn't the right fit.
Right. Or a company might make a drastic change to their marketing strategy just because a competitor did something that went viral.
That's the availability bias at play.
And then there are businesses that just accept the first price they're quoted without even trying to negotiate. They're anchored.
So how can our listener actually apply this understanding of cognitive biases in their own business?
First, educate yourself about those common cognitive biases. Then question your initial assumptions. Don't just go with your gut.
So slow down and think things through.
Right. Seek out different perspectives, especially from people who might disagree with you. And when you're negotiating, do your research.
Know your worth before you even start talking numbers.
Yeah. And be prepared to walk away if the deal isn't right for you. When you're assessing risks, rely on solid data over those vivid anecdotes.
So don't let a dramatic story cloud your judgment.
Right. For example, let's say you're evaluating a new market. Don't just focus on one successful company. Dig deeper. Use data to analyze the broader trends. And before you start negotiations, set clear financial goals and stick to your limits. That helps you resist anchoring.
Okay, on to our third hidden thinking trick. This is something we all deal with. The confidence trap.
This is all about how we tend to overestimate our abilities.
Mm-hmm.
We think we know more than we actually do.
And that can lead to problems.
Definitely. It feeds this illusion of knowledge and can make us overly confident in our judgments. Plus, we have something called the narrative fallacy.
That sounds intriguing. What is that?
It's our brain's tendency to weave stories that explain past events, which then tricks us into thinking the future is predictable.
But it's really not.
Not as much as we'd like to think.
So what are the benefits of recognizing this overconfidence?
Well, for one, it helps us plan more realistically. When we admit we don't know everything, we build in those contingency plans.
We're not caught off guard when things don't go exactly as planned.
Exactly. It also improves how we assess risk. We're less likely to jump into risky ventures based on overly optimistic forecasts.
We're more cautious.
Right. And importantly, it makes us more open to learning. We start to realize that we don't have all the answers.
And we're more willing to learn from our mistakes.
You got it.
What happens when we don't keep our overconfidence in check?
Well, you might see projects failing, going way over budget in time. The planning fallacy in action.
Because we were too optimistic in the beginning.
Exactly. And some businesses fail because founders underestimate the competition. That's the entrepreneurial delusion.
They think their idea is so unique that nothing can stop them.
Right. And leaders who think they have a complete understanding of everything, they can make bad strategic decisions.
So how are companies in the U.S. trying to avoid these overconfidence pitfalls? What are they doing?
Some companies, like Intuit, do this interesting thing called a pre-mortem analysis.
How is that?
Before starting a big project, they imagine it's already failed, and they work backward, figuring out all the possible reasons why.
That's a clever way to uncover potential problems.
It helps to surface risks that might be overlooked because of that overconfidence. And venture capital firms, they are really good at due diligence.
So they're not just taking the founder's word for it.
Right. They're seeking out expert opinions to challenge those optimistic projections. And then you have big companies like Shell using scenario planning.
They're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. They're developing multiple scenarios for the future instead of relying on just one prediction.
So for our listeners, how can they practically apply this awareness of overconfidence in their own business?
Make it a habit to ask yourself, why might my plan fail?
Don't be afraid to play devil's advocate with yourself.
Exactly. And do those pre-mortem exercises. Don't just rely on internal forecasts. Get those outside perspectives, data, and benchmarks.
See what's happening in the real world?
Right? Use that outside view. Look at those base rates of success and failure for similar ventures. So let's say you're about to launch a new product.
You've got to do your research.
Yeah, conduct a pre-mortem. Look at failure rates for similar products. Get feedback from potential customers.
People who aren't directly involved in the project?
Exactly. Get that unbiased opinion.
This all ties into our fourth hidden thinking trick, looking beyond your bubble.
That's all about embracing the outside view.
Okay, so explain that a bit more.
When we make predictions or plan for the future, we tend to focus on our specific situation, the inside view.
We think about our team, our resources, our challenges.
Yeah, but we often forget to step back and look at the bigger picture.
The outside view.
Right. That's looking at relevant statistics, historical data, past experiences, and really understanding those base rates.
So what typically happens in situations similar to ours?
Exactly.
Why is this outside perspective so important?
It gives us a dose of reality. Our internal assessments can be overly optimistic.
We need that check and balance.
Yeah. It helps us make more accurate forecasts for things like project timelines and costs.
So we're not caught off guard.
Right. And we can manage risks better. We learn about common pitfalls from those who have gone before us.
So we don't repeat their mistakes.
Exactly. Ultimately, it gives us a more objective foundation for strategic decisions.
We're not just relying on our own limited view.
Right.
What are the consequences of ignoring this broader perspective?
You become a victim of the planning fallacy. Projects take longer, cost more, because we didn't look at what typically happens.
We underestimate the challenges.
Right. And businesses can fail because they ignore those high failure rates in their industry.
Thinking they're somehow different.
They think they're special.
Yeah.
And we can end up repeating past mistakes because we didn't learn from them.
So how are companies in the U.S. using this outside view effectively?
Benchmarking is a great example. Companies compare their performance to industry averages. That's the outside view, helping them identify areas for improvement.
They're not just looking at their own internal data.
Right. And they use industry reports, data from firms like Gartner and Nielsen, and economic forecasts to plan their strategy.
So they're looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. And experienced project managers, they draw on their past experiences and industry data to make more realistic plans.
They've seen it all before.
Right.
What kind of errors do we see when companies or individuals don't use this wider lens?
Startups often underestimate the time and money it takes to launch a product. They base their projections only on internal estimates.
They haven't looked at the typical challenges others face.
Exactly. Or a business might jump into a crowded market without analyzing the success rates of existing players. They ignore those base rates.
They don't see the potential roadblocks ahead.
Right. And then you see companies sticking with a marketing strategy that's failed in the past. They haven't analyzed why it failed.
They're not learning from their mistakes or from the experience of others.
Exactly.
So for our listener, how can they practically embrace this outside view?
Before you start anything big, ask yourself what happened in similar situations. Research those industry base rates.
Do your homework.
Exactly. Challenge those optimistic internal projections with external data. So if you're launching a software product, research average customer acquisition costs, typical development timelines, and failure rates.
Get a realistic view of the landscape.
Right.
Our fifth hidden thinking trick delves into the logic of algorithms. It's about when formulas can actually outperform human intuition.
This is fascinating because it challenges the idea that experience always trumps everything else. In many areas, a simple formula based on a few key factors can be more accurate than an expert's intuition.
That's surprising. How is that possible?
Algorithms aren't biased. They don't get swayed by emotions or random details.
They just look at the data objectively.
Exactly. And they can process huge amounts of data, which can lead to better predictions.
So what's the benefit for me if I start to incorporate this algorithmic approach in my business?
More accurate predictions. You can evaluate loans, screen job candidates, even make medical diagnoses more accurately.
Wow.
It also makes decision-making more consistent. Everyone is judged against the same standards, reducing the risk of unfairness.
That's a huge benefit.
And it can boost efficiency. Automating decisions saves time and resources.
So you can focus on the more complex tasks.
Exactly.
What happens when we rely solely on human intuition in areas where algorithms could excel?
Our decisions can be less effective, even biased. We might judge similar situations differently depending on who's making the call.
So we lack consistency.
And we might miss out on opportunities to automate things, which would make us more efficient.
How are some companies successfully leveraging algorithms here in the U.S.?
Look at credit scoring. FICO uses algorithms based on tons of data to assess someone's creditworthiness.
It's much more accurate than a human loan officer just going with their gut.
Exactly. And in the financial markets, you've got algorithmic trading systems.
Making trades in milliseconds based on preset rules.
They often outperform human traders. And in HR, companies are using applicant tracking systems. They use algorithms to screen and rank job applications.
So recruiters don't have to manually go through hundreds of resumes.
You got it.
What about the competition? What errors do they make when they're not using these tools?
Some smaller financial institutions still make loan decisions based on gut feelings.
And they probably have higher default rates than those using algorithms.
Right. You might see investment advisors relying on intuition to pick stocks.
And missing out on the more consistent returns an algorithm could provide.
Exactly. And if a company's still manually going through resumes, they might miss qualified candidates.
An algorithm could quickly identify those hidden gems.
Right.
So for our listeners who want to get on board with this logic of algorithms, what's their first step?
Think about the decisions in your business that are based on evaluating specific criteria. Could you create a simple formula to aid or even automate that process?
Take the emotion out of it.
Yeah. For instance, a sales team could use a lead scoring system to prioritize their leads.
Based on factors like company size and engagement level?
That way, they're not just going by their first impressions.
Okay, moving on to hidden thinking trick number 6. The art of presentation, which is all about how framing can influence choices.
It's amazing how the way we present information can change the decisions people make, even if the facts are the same.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. Whether you highlight the gains or the losses, or set a certain option as the default, it can have a big impact.
Can you give us an example of this framing effect in action?
Let's say you're offered a medical treatment. If the doctor says it has a 90% success rate, you feel good about it.
Sure.
But if they say it has a 10% failure rate, you might hesitate, even though it's the same thing.
It's just framed differently.
Right. That's gain versus loss framing.
Yeah.
And another example is default options. If a company automatically enrolls employees in a retirement savings plan, more people participate.
Compared to if they had to opt in.
Exactly.
So understanding this power of framing, how can I use it to my advantage?
Well, you can make your communication more persuasive. When you frame offers to emphasize the benefits, people are more likely to say yes.
You appeal to their desire to gain something
Right. You can also make your marketing and product presentations more effective.
by really highlighting value.
And using those default options, you can actually nudge people towards positive behaviors.
Okay, so what happens if I'm not aware of this framing effect?
You might miss out on sales. You might present something as a cost instead of a benefit.
People are more likely to focus on what they're losing.
Right. And you might focus on potential downsides, causing negative reactions.
So always try to highlight the positive.
And if you're not using default options, you're missing out on chances to subtly influence choices in a good direction.
What are some smart companies doing with framing?
Subscription services use loss aversion. Don't miss out on this deal. That gets people to sign up.
They make you feel like you're losing something if you don't act now.
Right. And many companies now automatically enroll employees in retirement plans.
They make it easy to do the right thing.
And in sales, you see a lot of benefit-oriented language, like this software will increase your productivity.
Instead of saying it will reduce errors, which sounds negative.
You got it.
And what about companies that aren't using framing effectively?
They might present a service upgrade as just a price increase, focusing on the loss.
Instead of the benefits you get.
Right. Or they might not offer a pre-selected eco-friendly option.
Missing that opportunity to nudge people towards a more sustainable choice.
Exactly. And sometimes their marketing focuses on features, not benefits.
So people don't understand how the product will actually improve their lives.
Exactly.
So for our listeners who want to master this art of presentation, what's their first step?
Be mindful of how you present information. Always frame things in terms of gains, not losses.
What's in it for them?
Exactly. Use those default options to promote good behaviors. And try out different framing techniques to see what works best for your audience.
So if you're selling insurance, you might frame it as protecting your family's future instead of focusing on the cost of premiums.
Exactly.
Okay, our final hidden thinking trick focuses on two sides of the coin.
The experiencing and remembering selves.
I love this one. It's so interesting. Break it down for us.
We all have these two ways of evaluating our experiences. The experiencing self is all about the present moment, those immediate feelings.
How we feel right now.
Yeah. And the remembering self looks back and summarizes the whole experience.
So it's about our overall impression of something.
Exactly. And it's heavily influenced by the most intense moment, the peak and the ending.
So how we feel at the end of something really sticks with us.
Right.
So how can understanding these two selves benefit business owners and leaders?
Well, you can create a better overall customer experience. You focus on making each interaction enjoyable for the experiencing self.
Keep them happy in the moment.
And you also ensure a positive final impression for the remembering self.
So they leave with a good feeling that they'll associate with your brand.
You got it. And you can design services with a focus on those peak moments and a strong finish.
Because that's what they'll remember.
Exactly.
Right.
And it even applies to employees. If they have a positive overall memory of their time with your company, they're more likely to stay.
And recommend your company to others.
Right.
But what if we ignore these two perspectives?
You might end up with unhappy customers. Even if most of their interaction was good, a negative ending can ruin it.
It leaves a bad taste in their mouth.
Right. And that can lead to bad reviews and negative word of mouth.
Because people tend to share their overall impression, not the individual moment.
Exactly. And the same goes for employees. If their overall memory is bad, they're more likely to leave and maybe even badmouth the company.
Even if there were some good times.
Yeah.
So what are savvy companies doing to appeal to both the experiencing and remembering selves?
Luxury hotels like the Ritz-Carlton, they're all about creating those wow moments.
Those peak experiences.
Exactly. Many restaurants also focus on a pleasant checkout process and maybe a memorable dessert.
So they leave you with a sweet memory.
Right. And companies that value employee experience do thorough exit interviews and make sure the offboarding process is respectful.
So even though they're leaving, they have a good final impression.
Exactly.
And what about the companies that aren't doing this?
Well, you might see companies with great service, but a terrible billing process.
That ruins the whole experience.
Right. Or they might not handle customer complaints effectively.
Creating a negative peak.
Exactly. And if the offboarding process is disorganized and impersonal, it leaves employees with a bad taste in their mouth.
So for our listeners who want to build better relationships, how can they apply this understanding of the two selves?
Map out the entire customer and employee journey. Figure out those key touch points, those peak moments, and how things end. Focus on making those moments positive and memorable, especially the ending.
So even if some parts aren't perfect, a positive peak and a good ending can save the day.
Right. For instance, a software company could offer amazing onboarding for new users and really helpful support when someone cancels their subscription.
So even leaving is a positive experience.
Exactly.
And there you have it, our 7 hidden thinking tricks to help you make smarter decisions.
It's all about understanding these principles, from how our brain processes information to how we remember experiences.
Use these insights to navigate the complexities of business.
Absolutely. Remember, just being aware of these things is a good start.
Knowledge is power.
But the real key is to apply these principles in your everyday decisions.
That's how you achieve better results.
Exactly.
And now for a little food for thought. How might understanding these hidden tricks not only improve your business decisions, but also your personal choices? It's something to ponder.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're all about getting you informed efficiently, no information overload here. We cut through the noise to bring you the essential insights that really matter.
And today we are diving into something super fascinating. We're going to unlock these hidden thinking tricks that can really sharpen our decision-making.
Yeah, you know those sneaky mental patterns that influence our choices? We've been poring over some really compelling research to extract the practical knowledge that can actually give you an edge.
Absolutely. Think of this as a fast track to understanding those core principles about how we think and how we make choices.
We're going to journey through 7 key